What's up, guys? This is Rey-Jay back with another video. And in this one, I want to break down what's happening with SPY, the QQQ, and Tesla stock. I'm going to break down why there's a risk of more downside looking at the current setups and what's happening so far looking at seasonality and other factors. Just know that I am not a financial planner, so take nothing I'm saying as financial advice whatsoever. Anyways, so one thing that's very interesting is that ever since the month of October started, stocks like Tesla have been dumping. Tesla used to be at $480 a share, and then we got this big sell off after deliveries all the way down towards 418 a share. Then it bounced again, only to reject again. And since then, it's been falling and falling and falling. So the question is, why is this happening? And could we have foreseen this move? The same thing happened to SPY and the QQQ. Ever since we got to the month of October, the market went a little bit higher. Then we got this massive sell off. And since then, it's been dumping again. As you guys could tell, we have a head and shoulders like pattern on SPY, which could be suggesting even more downside to come. We were also talking about how we had a rising wedge on SPY, which led to a sell off. This is a double confluence of us selling off. Same thing with the QQQ. We have a head and shoulders like pattern. How low will the market go? What's going on, in my opinion? I'm going to give you guys at least some answers. So let's talk about this. We're going to start off by talking about Tesla stock, which is a very important one. I'm going to be using a very, very cool tool known as Forecaster. This tool is very awesome for looking at seasonality and understanding projections about the markets. I'm going to prove to you guys that this tool is very, very valid and very awesome, and why I do highly recommend it for stock analysis. First off, just look at what it was telling us for many, many months. This has been telling us that October, it's been screaming October is a bearish month for Tesla, right? And if it's screaming that, it would not make sense to just start buying up Tesla like crazy near all-time highs. When we look at a lot of our indicators, Tesla was in overbought territory, and since then it's been subsiding. And simultaneously, looking at the advanced DPO, when you get sell ratings, typically that's a sign that Tesla would start dropping. And then when you get to low levels, we tend to get these like buy ratings, which tells us that Tesla's about to bounce. The advanced DPO is very accurate at forecasting that. Check this out, guys. As soon as we entered October, we got a sell rating on Tesla. Forecaster was telling us it's intelligent to sell Tesla around the 460 area, sell it way up here, because ever since that happened, it's been downtrending since then. So this was accurate at causing and catching that sell rating, which is very, very useful for long-term investments. When Tesla starts dipping more, there's going to be a big buying opportunity, and this will give you the exact timing for when you could start buying. A good buy rating could be coming. So that's the very, very useful thing about Forecaster when looking at your advanced DPO. Now, on top of this, there's all kinds of things you guys could look at, such as like the fundamentals of Tesla. How is Tesla looking fundamentally? What's happening with their PE ratio and such? The average fair value is $325 a share for Tesla, which could make the argument that Tesla's overvalued. And if that is to be made, then there is reason to believe there's downside coming. But I want to show you guys the seasonality indicators. Let me actually go down first to show you the monthly averages. So on average, shorts tend to print a lot more in the month of October for Tesla, but November and December tend to be more bullish, at least historically. So the whole notion that October is a bearish month, also known as October for Tesla and the markets, that has panned out very, very nicely. And Forecaster highlighted that for quite some time. I've been saying this for many, many weeks that we're going to likely sell off in October, but that's nothing more than a buying opportunity. Currently, there is a high correlation, a 78% correlation between Tesla's chart right down what we saw 5 years ago, and an 88% correlation between now and 7 years ago. Historically, what this chart would suggest is that when we hit October, Tesla starts to sell off very drastically, and then once we get to the November period, we do tend to start running, right? And that's like an implication that this is a good buying opportunity. So going back to our projection indicator right here, check this out. We're going to go to 1 month out, and you can also use this tool to kind of like forecast what a stock will likely do. This was screaming there's going to be a sell-off coming 1 month out. The projection is weak. It's been saying that for quite some time, and there was a risk of Tesla dipping to not only 410, but all the way down towards the 390s and 370s. It was saying that for a while, and that's exactly what's starting to happen to Tesla. But despite the fact that Tesla would sell off, 3 months out, we're still looking more bullish. There's a good chance Tesla will continue to bounce. We're going to see some kind of big bounce coming 3 months out for Tesla, which tells us that if we get a very, very nice pullback, so if you guys look at Tesla like this, I'm going to delete my drawings. What you'll see is that this looks like a left shoulder. This is like a head. And since then, we've been forming a right shoulder and downtrending. That means that if Tesla returns to essentially the gap fill at 413, or if we keep falling to the second gap fill around 395, that could be your first buying opportunity at 395. And then, it's also possible we retest the previous highs here in like the 370s. Even if Tesla drops all the way down towards like 370, that's another really good buying opportunity, because once we get to November and December, we're going to likely see a very, very big bounce in Tesla. This is what Forecaster is essentially telling us, which is very, very useful for long-term investments. So this could be like our trade. There was a good shorting opportunity on Tesla, and if it does start dipping lower, we could be looking for a big bounce by the time we get to November and December. But that's what I'm seeing, at least so far. Before we start predicting the bounce, though, we have to focus on the sell-off. Please remember that Tesla has a big gap over here. There's a big gap to fill around 413. There's a second gap all the way down here at 395, or very close to 395, right? It doesn't have to be perfect. In the mid 390s, there's a gap, and those will likely get filled. Why else might Tesla sell off? There's another reason why. Secondly, if you look at SPY, check this out. We had a rising wedge and a big rejection that came. And then when you zoom out, we have a left shoulder, a head, and then a right shoulder. So this suggests, at the time I'm recording this, that this is going to be a left shoulder, a head, and a right shoulder. Of course, there's always the possibility that every trade could fail. So if we end up reclaiming like 665 or 670, we could try to invalidate this, but that's not looking as likely. What's more likely to happen is a test of 653. And if that fails us, we're going to likely continue to fall back down. And then this head and shoulders suggests the possibility of like the 630s. We could be looking for the next leg down around 646 and then 630 if that breaks. But even if we do dump all the way down to like 630 in the upcoming weeks, right, that's going to be fine, because it's nothing more than just a buying opportunity. Because in November and December, we're going to likely see a full rally, a nice V-shaped move back up. That's what's going to likely end up coming. And why do I say that? Because this is what Forecaster's also suggesting. Forecaster was telling us there's going to likely be some kind of sell-off coming. It's been screaming that for quite some time. The reason why I think it's very good it was doing this for a while is because the market did not pump that much since we got these sell ratings. SPY was at 667. It dipped a little bit more, went somewhat higher by like 7 points to 672, and then 674. And then from there, we dumped to 646. So the bigger move was actually downside over the past month, right? The bigger move was a big downside move, which is why it was vital for Forecaster to project this. So we're not really getting a sell rating yet. It might update in a day from now, and we might see the DPO give us that sell-off if the market sells off more like tomorrow. So it's still waiting to get that official sell-off confirmation. I think there's a good chance we're about to get it. However, when I go to the projection indicator, what you'll see is that we're going to be going to 1 month out. 1 month out, this is telling us that we're going to likely see some downside first. We could drop another 1.4%, or as much as another 3.76%, all the way down to like 640. That's the most likely possibility. We start to see more selling, and then we could be looking for a big bounce towards the end of the year in November/December. We could look at different cases, which is where this data has come from. Forecaster extrapolates data from the past to look at pattern recognition tools. And then it takes those tools to recognize the patterns, and it tells us what's going to likely happen based off that. So it's using patterns and seasonality to make these predictions. When it comes to our overall seasonality, I think it's like on this side. Sorry about that. This is following the trend. We do tend to sell off in that October period, and then we tend to be more bullish in November and December. So far, when you look at our seasonality, October and November tend to be decent. October tends to be weaker, but November and December tend to be a lot stronger. So that's what we're seeing, at least thus far. Now, going back to our projection indicator, 1 month out, we could be looking for a bit of a sell-off and a bounce. And then 3 months out, we're known for being more neutral/bullish. We could drop another 2%. We could go as much as like 4% to the downside or even 7%. There's likely more downside coming. But then as we approach the end of the year, we're looking for a big bounce. This is what all of these essentially suggest. So this downside move is nothing more than a buying opportunity. And once we get, a big sell off, once we officially get our DPO indicator to tell us that this is a sell rating and we're about to come down, we're going to be watching for a buy rating for nice buying opportunities for an end of the year squeeze. That's likely what's going to happen. Okay. So forecaster is very useful for this, for understanding what the market is likely doing and if it's risky to buy or sell. For example, when we were pushing near all-time highs, I told you it was not intelligent to buy up here because we were getting lots of risk of downside. And that's exactly what happened, right? It really gave us a good tool to understand if the market was overvalued or not, or if it was smart to buy. This was very, very useful for that. For the QQQ, the same thing essentially happened. When you look at the overview of the QQQ, this was bullish for quite some time, but then all of a sudden, we're going to go back to the QQQ. What happened? We got a head and shoulders, big rejection on the triple Q ever since the tariff news came out. And we have a head and shoulders and a rising wedge, which is looking more bearish. This does not look good. It was not intelligent to buy up here in the 610s because we would eventually drop to the 500s again. And that's what forecaster was telling us. I'll show you guys in just 1 second. We have a left shoulder, a head, and the right shoulder now. And we need to get back above at least 607 to try to invalidate this. If we can't, there's going to be a risk of us dipping towards 590, 586, which is where the 200 EMA is. And if we can't hold that, I do see us making new lows to continue to dump. So keep that in mind. These resistances becoming supports around 580 could be retested, and we may be falling even more on the QQQ. I don't just say this based off the setups, it's also because of what forecaster is telling us. If we scroll down here, you will see that we could look at the average yearly performance. And I think that this year we're going to be bullish for the year. We do tend to be bullish for the years, but for the short term, we might get a temporary buying opportunity. So when it comes to seasonality, we tend to correct in that September/October period. This year, I think that the sell off was a little bit delayed. It did not happen until October. But now we're going to see this likely pan out, only for us to be bullish in November and December. And then I'm seeing the same things basically panning out, at least for now. Also, when you look at our projections right over here, so I want to pull up the projections. 3 months out, we're going to likely see some more downside between 2.8% for 585. We could go as low as 10% down if it's like a major sell off. That may be a little bit extreme. So I would say somewhere in between 2.8 and 10% is where we might be going, which could be like another like 5% to correct on the QQQ. And then we're going to likely bounce for the end of the year. There's going to be a big bounce likely coming. Our projection indicators also suggest 1 month out, there's a risk of us being down between 2 and 5%, like I said. And then we should bounce after that. So the projection is still strong. We have very high robustness, which tells us that this overall projection is very, very high quality. And we could look at the historical data, which is where this comes from. So the same thing is being told again. I also think this is useful because we're about to get a potential sell rating if the market continues this drop, telling us and waiting for confirmation that it was smart to sell. And then once we really start dipping, we're going to be looking for a buy rating. This was giving us a sell rating over here. We sold off. We did get one sell rating here, but then the market came down a bit only to bounce. And then we were continuing to rally as time went on. And I think that there is a risk of the same thing, something very similar happening. We're going to get another sell rating as we dump, but this time we're going to be watching for the buy rating once we form our bottom. And I think that this tends to be very accurate, at least nonetheless, when you look at the chart for many, many months out. When we look at this in more detail, we're going to be looking at what else you could do with this. You could look at projections, look at our charts, and understand the past correlated events with all of your indicators using Forecaster. You could also see what politicians tend to do. Are they buying? Are they selling? That could be very, very cool for understanding what's going on in the back end if you guys are interested in looking at that. So for now, the market's looking bearish. And what's going to happen is people are going to be panicking when everyone is following the trend and just selling, expecting a massive crash, right? That is exactly when you have to turn greedy. And if you want to know exactly when it's smart to just be selling or buying stocks if there's a good buying opportunity coming, you guys could use this tool known as Forecaster to really look at all these specific details to see if there are good moves likely going to be coming or not. I say that because I think Forecaster is very awesome for this. It's a very, very cool tool for understanding what stocks are likely going to be doing. And it doesn't have to be just about SPY, the QQQ, and Tesla. You guys could also look up different stocks, such as like the IWM, for example, for those who are interested in looking at others out there like the Russell 2000. You could look at the Russell 2000. You guys could look at NVIDIA, whatever stock you guys want to use. You guys could use this at least for all of that. So I think that's the very, very awesome thing about this. This is just very, very useful data for all kinds of different stocks. For example, on the IWM, 3 months out, it's telling us we're going to likely sell off, but then there's going to be a very, very big bounce coming later on, at least for the end of the year, just like SPY and the QQQ. The same thing is happening again, so please keep that in mind, and that's likely what we're going to be seeing. So with that being said, what do I think the market's going to do? There's downside risk looking at the head and shoulders and rising wedges on SPY and the QQQ, and as the market drops, Tesla will likely continue to fall. We have some gaps to fill. There's a gap over here at 413, another gap at 395-ish, around that area. So we're going to likely see downside temporarily looking at the setups. I was calling this move for a while and it's finally here. However, I am not a perma bear. I'm not saying the market will for sure crash. I'm not saying it's guaranteed to crash. This is nothing more than a buying opportunity. So that being said, I want to thank you all so much for listening. Forecaster is a very, very awesome tool for understanding what the market will likely be doing. And I do highly recommend this tool for understanding what stocks will do, to understand projections, and then to see when we get a big shift in our data. For now, the market's bearish, but eventually the buying opportunity is going to be coming. And I think if you guys want to time that, if you want to see when is there going to be a good time to start buying up SPY, the QQQ, Tesla, and the others, you could use Forecaster as a good trading assist tool by using their indicators and tools to understand if the market's too oversold, if it's smart to be buying at a particular level, and to see all kinds of other different stocks. You could use this for the IWM, you could use this for SPX, and the list goes on. There's are endless possibilities for this tool. Anyways, that's it for this one. Thank you all so much for listening. Enjoy your guys' weekends, and I'll be back very soon with another updates tomorrow. Have a good one, and peace out.